Wrong switch. There we go. Okay. Let's get rolling here. We'll finish up content in a minute. I don't think it'll take the whole class. We'll just talk about coding, and I may not go through every single point that is on here. I might just talk about coding in a more general sense. And then, we'll let you go. Like I said, a little bit early. Again, if you haven't done the spot yet, do the spot. You have some time. Okay, so hopefully everybody got the announcement. I put through kind of a general amnesty for everyone. An extension, right, till December 10th for the lab. You can still hand it in early, right, obviously. Yeah, please.
That extension doesn't mean we'll get 10% off. We'll still get our full grade.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, an extension means that's now the due date. Yeah, no, I was like, yes, an extension.
Before, and so if you do the extension, still 10% off. So
Is this person a sociopath? Okay, just checking. I mean, that doesn't seem... It's like, you may hand it in whatever you want. I don't know. No, the new due date is now the 10th, right? Because I was like, honestly, 15 people emailed me yesterday being like, can I have an extension till this day? I'm like, whatever. Let's all just take till the end of the week. Yes, so now it is due on the 10th. Today, right? So, like... There's no lab, obviously, because now we're done with the mini labs, and I'll be working as quickly as I can this afternoon to get through your 6th mini lab to just give feedback. Some people got it back already because I did them on Friday. If people handed them in early, for those other people who didn't, I will get to those as quickly as I can. It's my mission in life to do it this afternoon. The lab, instead of having the lab in that room in the basement, just come up to my office. It's one floor up. Tori 1-062. I'll be there. I'm probably going to be sticking around till about 5 today because I have an appointment later at my daughter's school. So there's no point in me going home. So I'll be around till like 5. Feel free to pop by if you just want to like check over a couple things with regards to your second major lab. Or anything else, right? If you want to talk about your midterm, this feels a little late at this point, but you can totally come and talk about your midterm if you want. I'll be there. And then tomorrow, if you have the Wednesday lab, I will be around probably from about 3 till 4, just to, feel free to stop by. I'll actually be in the office from like 1 tomorrow. Like I finished my SOC 100 class at 1. And I'll be in my office from like 1 until about 4. So feel free to stop by anytime in there. But don't go to the room downstairs, and I'll send out an email to this effect too. Because I don't like that room, and I want to hang out in there. So I'm going to say come to my office, which literally is just like 1 floor up on the other side of the building. So come see me, and that'll be good. Any questions before I... try to wrap up the course content in a way that makes sense? We're just going to talk about coding in very, very basic terms here. Yeah, Mia.
Do you know how many questions would be on the final exam, and if there's going to be like short answer?
So it's the same format as the midterm. So basically, it's going to be 30 multiple choice, 4 short answer. 2 of the short answer are like information, 2 of them are application. So exactly the same format, except now the theme is qualitative. So it's also non-cumulative, so you don't have to worry about... That was your question? Yeah. Okay, yeah, you don't have to worry about all the quantitative stuff. It's just going to be on the stuff we've covered since the midterm. So, yeah, so like for instance, on the short answer, you won't be asked to ask survey or write survey questions, right? It would be like interview questions or something, or qualitative research question, something of that nature, right? How would you, I will propose a project, and like, oh, how would you, that's qualitative, how would you include a quantitative component in it, right? Something like that you've already done in the labs. Does that answer? Okay. Other questions? And I promise it won't be that bad. Yeah, Michaela.
Just making sure that we don't have to do like citations for the major lab.
Pish, posh, and pshaw. No.
Okay.
No. Let's not worry about the finer points. I'll leave that for advanced social methods for someone a little bit more nitpicky than me. I just want you to put together the proposal and all of that stuff. Josie?
Oh, better now.
Okay. You can have them. You don't need them, right? I'm not marking citations. And if you put a citation and you do MLA style wrong, also don't do MLA in social sciences because it's dumb. Double oops. No, come on. APA or Chicago. Come on. MLA is for like those bookish nerds in English. Come on. You can do MLA. It's perfectly fine. This is not my favorite citation style. I find it hard to read. Chicago is the most beautiful of all, with its lovely footnotes. Anyway, what's that? Yeah, Chicago's lovely. Any journal that asks me to do stuff in APA style, I'm always like, would you accept Chicago in its place? Because I don't like APA. Anyway, doesn't matter. I've clearly lost my mind. It's the end of the semester. But yeah, no citations necessary unless you want to, right? Obviously, it doesn't hurt, but I'm not. It's not in the rubric, so it's not like I'm not grading based on that. Okay. Other questions? Nay. Okay. I sound like a horse. Okay. Oh, sleep deprivation only will get you so far. All right. So, coding, right? So, I guess we ended off talking about last time, we're doing qualitative research. Once you have your interviews or your ethnographic data, but mostly, right, interviews or focus groups, and you've transcribed them, right? The process you go through then is coding. Now, almost everybody now does this using some kind of software, right? NVivo is the really, really popular one in social sciences for whatever reason. And it's one of those things, nobody likes it, but everybody uses it. So kind of like survey software, it's Qualtrics. Everybody hates it, but everybody uses it. Everybody hates SPSS, but everybody uses it anyway. NVivo is basically the same thing, and it seems to be kind of the industry standard now in academia for coding data. And really all you're doing when you're coding, right, these are kind of questions you can ask. I won't go through each of these, right, but these are things you can kind of think about as you're, as you're coding data. Like, what sort of answer to that question does the data imply? What's happening here? Like, what's the context that's going on? What kind of event is going on? But here's like some practical tips, right? Code and transcribe as soon as possible. Again, kind of like field notes, right? The idea behind coding and transcribing and coding, you do transcribing first. Your data is to be as close to it as possible in time, right? So that your interpretation of the data doesn't have time to change, right? That you don't start reinterpreting things based on new interviews you've done or whatever it happens to be. Okay, there's a very awkward phrase that everybody in social sciences uses for these 2 points, which I think is kind of funny. So read through the data before considering any interpretations, right? And especially with interviews, if you're recording them, a lot of people will re-listen to their interviews. I've had researchers tell me, they load it up on their phone and they listen to them, like their interviews as they go for a run or whatever, right? As they do their workout. But this is sometimes referred to as bathing in the data. And I find the phrase awkward, but kind of funny. So I mean, when I was talking to one of our methodologists, Phil Bawadi, who's kind of new in the department as of last year, and I was talking about how I did my research. This is how I did my coding, and I did my coding in a slightly eclectic way, which I'll tell you about in a sec. But I was like, yeah, I feel kind of bad. I wasn't very systematic about it. We said, well, that's fine as long as you were bathing in the data. And I'm like, odd phrasing, but okay. And I hear this all the time, right? Oh, you just have to be bathed or soaking in the data. Okay. That just means, right, basically you're immersed in it all the time, right? And your transcripts backwards and forwards. I'm pretty sure with the interviews that I did, I can still remember most of what was said, and probably within about 5 minutes, I could find the spot in the video where it is, because I listened to them over and over and over again to really, wash myself in the data. So that's, the idea is you really need, in order to code properly, you really need to know what's inside your interviews, right? Now, this is especially important, I guess, if you didn't do the interviews, right? Let's say as you progress, in your academic work, if you do, and you're part of a research team, right? Maybe you're working with interview data and you're coding stuff that you didn't do the interviews for. You really need to know the data before you start coding, right? So, yeah, maybe in your second or third kind of read through, you start to note keywords and themes, which is essentially kind of that first step in creating codes, right? So you start to put kind of statements into categories. You might not explicitly use the software at this stage, but you would eventually. Okay, and this one, don't be concerned that you're creating too many codes. This is something that people doing it for the first time often get kind of futzed about. It's like, man, I'm creating too many codes. This is going to be a mess later on. Just do it like on your first pass through data. Just put as many codes in as you can. And then what you do on a later pass is you clean up the codes, right? You might combine codes, you might delete codes, right? But you don't have to worry about, being perfect on your first pass, especially, if you're doing your master's or your PhD and it's your first time doing coding. Just produce as many codes as you can and then clean it up later. As they say in the biz, you fix it in post, right? All right, yeah, I mean, once you've got kind of you've gone through, you've coded things, right? You review the codes, you consider associations, how they work together, redundancies. Do you have two codes that are really referring to the same thing using different language? Relationships to existing concepts. Consider kind of general theoretical ideas regarding the codes and data, right? So here you're starting to think about what all of it means, right? Are you thinking about, I don't know, like heavy theoretical, data, like, I don't know, biopolitics. Maybe you've got a code for, you're doing a lot of Foucault and you're doing biopolitics. I cannot write on this screen because it keeps moving every time I touch it. Biopolitics, right? Or something like that, right? Theoretical ideas, right? And this is part of doing that research project, right? You're going to have done a lit review, right? And you're going to have some kind of theoretical notions from sociology that you're going to, kind of be working with. Or governmentality or, post-structuralism or something, right? Keep coding in perspective. You don't want to get, I guess, hung up too much in coding. It's one part of the research project, and it's one that I've seen friends of mine sort of get lost in the coding part, right? Where they spend months and months and months just coding the data and going through it 20, 30. I have one friend, very conscientious. Yeah, that's a nice way of saying a little bit neurotic. I love her, but she spent like 8 months coding her 20 interviews, right? And it was just a giant waste of time, right? So be conscious, right? It's just one part of the broader research project. You need to move on. There's a lot of other parts to the project, right? Especially, it's not the whole project of interpretation or, linking things to individual literature or telling the stories of your data. So don't get lost in it. Like, it's easy, and sometimes you'll have a supervisor who really is like, pushing you to code and keep coding. Bit of practical advice: if you go into a master's or a PhD program, and something I learned through painful experience, you need to be able to tell your supervisor or someone else in your research project, no, that's insane, I'm not doing that. But I mean, when I went to do like my candidacy exams, my supervisor, who I think basically just wanted to be rid of me for 6 months, gave me a list of readings to do. And she's like, okay, now that you did your specialization where I read 119 books and 60 articles in a year, she's like, go read for another 6 months. And I was like, I read for 3 days, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. I wrote my candidacy proposal in 3 days, and then off we were to the races. So you might have a supervisor that's like, code some more, and you can just say, no, I've coded enough. We're moving on. And I know that's a scary thought. Trust me, when you get into grad school and you tell your supervisor no, you think they're going to like blow a blood vessel, but they might actually be like, oh, okay, whatever, which is more typical. All right. Problems with coding, you can lose a lot of context, right? If you break things up, especially into these like really nitpicky kind of categories, right? So this statement in the interview is about biopolitics. This one's about, personal experiences. This is about mothers, who feed their children Fruit Loops for breakfast, or whatever your codes are, right? Sometimes you end up losing the context of the interviews, which when you go to reassemble it into a narrative, right? Which is like you're writing a journal article or a chapter in your dissertation or your master's project. What was actually happening there, right? When you break things up, and if you've ever like looking at something through like a peephole, right? You miss the broader context of things. Codes can be a little bit like that. So, losing the context and fragmenting the data, breaking it up into small chunks, can result in a loss of the story. And sometimes, it'll let you put things together that don't actually fit together because you've broken statements down into such kind of tiny points that you've lost so much context that now you think things that clearly don't go together actually fit together. So careful with coding. All right. Turning data into fragments. Basic coding, right? Pretty superficial. Maybe this is where I always stay. Basically, like basic coding would be like your kind of first pass through the data, right, and creating codes. So you might create like very basic codes, negative, positive consequences of analyzed activity. Good mothers, bad things, statements about good mothering and bad mothering, and all these sorts of things, right? You can get deeper, right, as you rework your original codes. You typically break them down, create more nuanced coding, right? You might go beyond the sort of negative, positive kind of thing, rework the codes, refine them so they get more precise into what you're talking about. And especially like in a grounded theory approach, right? You might actually discover a whole bunch of new concepts as you're going on and then refine your existing codes. So you'll get, a more and more awareness of what you're analyzing, your interviews, your content, or whatever it happens to be. Explore the broader analytic themes. Once you kind of have coded stuff, what you'll typically do is you would use something like NVivo to like analyze, say what kind of statements you saw the most, and then you might move away from, content of specific interviews, right, to a broader analysis of your project as a whole, right? Your 20 interviews, what were the themes that you found in those? Okay. So computer assist. Okay. So this is a computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, or CAC-DAS. I don't think anyone actually calls it that, but I never used any of this. I used Word. I just put everything in all the statements I found interesting in my 20 or so interviews into categories I created in Word because I'm a bad coder and I find it tedious. So I kind of did it, and I knew as Phil would say, I had immersed myself or bathed in the data, so I knew where everything was anyway, so it was all good. Most people though, and especially on big projects, and projects especially involving more than one person, right? If you have a team or you're part of a team, you're using, some kind of software, and there's a bazillion of these around. QSR, NVivo, Max, QDA are the big ones. And basically a lot of this is like, you upload your transcripts into it, right? And then you basically highlight, you'll have one pane over here where you have your codes, you have the text. And as you go through, you can highlight, in the interview it said, SOC 315 was the most boring class I ever took. Highlight that and put into the code of uninteresting academic work, right? And you basically do that, right? You highlight, drag, drop. And once you're kind of all done with these, right, they sort out the data for you, and they'll give you things like statistics, how many instances of this code you saw, where it was. You can do like incredible analysis with these tools if you want, right? So it'll show you a lot of trends in the data, it says, they don't interpret the data for you. You kind of have to go and look at what's in there and kind of go from there, right? There's a million of these. My favorite one must be Quirkos because it has the coolest and funniest sounding name, and it's the most like colorful. So yeah, go try Quirkos. I don't know why. The advantage is it does make the coding process a lot smoother. And a lot of times it'll visualize the data for you, right? It gives it these sort of visual codes. Sometimes it'll color code everything in transcripts for you, right? As you're sorting into codes, this code's yellow, this code's purple. So you can very easily go through it and kind of figure it out. You can allow you to estimate, how representative different quotes are, how much they line up with the rest of your data. It'll definitely improve the transparency of your data, your qualitative analysis. This is one of the things that you can do if ever you got questioned on your qualitative analysis, right? You were publishing something and someone wanted to audit your data and it's like, I really need to see your data on this piece because something you're saying doesn't make sense, right? You could upload your NVivo file and then someone else could very quickly look through how you'd coded stuff and assess, how well you've done a lot of the work. So, that's some of the advantages. Criticisms. It tends to quantify coded text, and maybe negate some of the interpretive work, right? And sometimes people will lean too hard on that quasi-quantitative aspect. It fragments the text into very small pieces of data, where the natural flow of the story is broken, right? So, there's that. It's closely built around grounded theory, right? A lot of the software kind of assumes a grounded theory approach. It can kind of box you into a grounded theory approach and negate some of the other ways of doing things that are also qualitative. Like I said, I never really used it. I still find it a little bit awkward, I have done like multiple interviews, like 20 interviews in one project, 4 or 6 focus groups, with between 4 and 10 participants in each, and I've never used NVivo for any of these kinds of software for any of it. I much prefer to just create a bunch of categories in Word as I'm like reading through the transcripts and sort of dump statements in there. But that's how my brain works. So don't ever feel like, you have to use this approach. Like it's a tool, it's not the tool. Unlike, quantitative analysis where you basically have to use Stata or SPSS or R. You don't have to use any of these tools in qualitative analysis. You can just be silly like me and use Word. All right, last thing, and I'll be really quick about this. And I know, then it's like, why did I come for a 30-minute class? I'm sorry. I only had this much left. Narrative analysis. Narrative analysis is a kind of weird and quirky qualitative methodology. I say weird and quirky. It's not really. I see this a lot. There's some in Crim, which I didn't realize until last year when we had a whole bunch of people present on it. You see it a lot, say, in kind of at U of A, like native studies, as an indigenous way of knowing, right? Telling stories and kind of narrative analysis. It's definitely a different sort of way of understanding the world, and one that is a little bit more, let's say, from a social science perspective, I think it looks a lot more like English, something like English or comparative literature than it does maybe, interviews or those structured forms of qualitative research. Yeah, please.
Do they tell a story, make up a story, or tell a story about their life?
It's more like tell a story about their, well, okay, it can be a lot of things, right? And here, some of it is it can be tell a story about your life, tell a story about your community, tell a story that's important in your community, right? That maybe you received secondhand, right? Stories that are really important in your culture, whether they're factual or not, right? It's trying to figure out, how people understand their life world, right? And some of that is kind of assuming that there are stories that people tell themselves and about themselves that tell us a lot about who they are and what they do. So I struggle with this a little bit because to me my phone has decided to start playing my podcast. That's cool. All right. Because it is a little bit less structured, right? But yeah, I mean, rather than, like, you would have people tell stories, right? It's storytelling, and you analyze kind of what is in the story, right? You look at the context and events and the interpretations that people make of them, right? What does this story mean to them in the context that they're telling it? And again, it can be pretty broad ranging. Certainly, like I said, a lot of indigenous people and indigenous ways of knowing often focus on kind of ways of storytelling. And it's not something I'm super well versed in. It's something I think sounds really interesting. But it shifts, I guess, the meaning away from what happened to how people make sense of their lives, right? How people make sense of an experience. How communities understand themselves, their histories, and all of these sorts of things are things that people have done with kind of narrative analysis. It's like, what's your story, right? What's the story of your life? What's the story of your, recovery? Or you could do this with any sort of thing, right? And they can bring in any aspects that they want, and you just kind of analyze it, like, how are they telling this story, and how does it make sense of their existence to them? Sorry, does that make sense, Mia? Kind of. Yeah, it's a very, I think, non-Western academic way of doing analysis in a way, and I think, which is why I say I've heard a lot more people kind of talking about it in terms of indigenous ways of knowing. So, storytelling can be really important to certain communities. And there's other groups in the world also where it's less like we must categorize everything into these scientific categories, right? Okay, good. Okay. I think I'm almost done. Okay. Yeah, 4 models of narrative analysis, right? So you can look at thematic, what was said rather than how it was said. So you look at the themes in the stories people tell. Structural, how the story was told, like how people construct a story, what's emphasized, maybe just emphasized, not even to increase its persuasiveness, but what do people put stress on in the stories that they're telling to communicate whatever it is they're trying to communicate. Interactional, right, examines the dialogue, co-construction between the teller and the listener. I'm going to just say, I don't understand what that means, but it's definitely something that I've heard in narrative analysis, right? I assume it sort of means like, how is it told to you, and then how do you interpret it, like how each person is interpreting the same story. And then performance, right? It examines narrative as a performance, as a moment in time. How do people use certain actions, certain words, certain articulations, emphases to tell a story and to get a point across? Okay, don't worry, that won't be on the test. Criticisms, right? Narrative analysis. Obviously it's less structured than some of these other forms that we've talked about, right? Narrative analysis, criticism over-relies on story and gives preference to accounts of participants as, the only explanation of social phenomenon, right? It really bases, everything must kind of actually swirl around how people understand their own lives, and that's what's constructing meaning and reality for them, right? So it's a very interpretivist, constructivist sort of way of looking at things, and definitely like quantitative people who have that more empiricist kind of way of looking at the world are going to be like, okay, that's just their stories, but that doesn't tell us about what's objectively happening, right? Stories might be accepted at face value by the researcher, right? This is pretty common, I think. It's like, this is their story, and I'm just going to, recount it because that's what they mean, rather than taking a critical stance. Taking a critical stance might help the researcher to understand motives, social situation of the teller, and broader social conditions in which the story is told, and that's good. But sometimes this comes at the expense of the relationship with the person who told the story, right? Because that may not be their reading of it. And you may be going against and even contradicting what they had to say. Okay. We're done. That is it for the content. We have finished. If for some reason after this you want to take another class with me, you could take SOC 315 again. No. I can't imagine why that would happen. We'll scroll that out. I use this for everything. This one, in winter, I'm teaching SOC of Youth and at St. Joe's Catholicism and Pop Culture. Those are both great classes. SOC of Youth is full right now. I'm going to open more seats soon. So if you're on the watch list, keep a close eye because I don't know how many more seats I can open because it's in Fab. I've never taught in Fab. It's in the one classroom in Fab. There's literally like one. I looked everywhere and I'm like, there's only one classroom in here, and somehow I'm there. So I'm in Fab. What? Yeah.
Just fab.
Fine Arts Building. Yeah, so you know that one that's brown, has the art gallery on the main floor and the incredibly ugly metal sculptures all around the building?
It's next to Hub.
Yeah, it's next to Hub. It's between Hub and Law. You've probably seen it and just like blanked it from your memory. It's like, fine arts, no one cares. It's in Fab for now. I don't know how many more seats I can put in, but I'm going to try to put more seats. Catholicism and pop culture. Every year I say this might be the last time I teach it, so get it while it's hot. It's fun. It's just basically all just looking at how Catholicism is represented in pop culture, both by Catholics and non-Catholics. I can send you if you're interested, I can send you the syllabus. It's a lot of fun. If you're just looking for a wacky, wild arts option to fill up a credit, it's a good time. We always have a lot of fun in it. You know, we look at things like The Exorcist, The Da Vinci Code, Spotlights, and a whole bunch of other stuff. There's one that I'm putting in this year is Miss Davis. Remember Mrs. Davis, which was this weird HBO series about a nun who battles an artificial intelligence called Mrs. Davis. And like she's like literally married to Jesus, and there's like sex scenes between her and Jesus in the series. It's wild. I'm like, cool, let's talk about that. And lots of other stuff. You know, I'll even talk for a week or so about contemporary Christian music. And you know, if you've never listened to any, it can be a treat and a half. And yeah, spring, you know, that's anyway, you can see it. You don't need me to narrate it to you. All the CHRTC classes are arts credits. 2 of those are online, so you can fit them into your schedule. And that's it for me. Right, again, labs this afternoon are in my office. Come if you want me to look over your major lab or something else, right? Must be something in the water, because if I get one more request for reference letters, I think I might explode. No, it's fine. I'm happy to write reference letters, but I got like 7 yesterday of people asking me for reference letters, and I'm like, I think I might be diluting my brand. Anyway, we'll see you if you come this afternoon. If not, I guess Thursday, I will come and just kind of hang out here during class time. Again, if you want to come chat about your major lab, which is now due on the 10th, you can. I'll just hang out in this room and probably mark some stuff. You can come. Don't feel like you have to, right? If you would rather sleep or accomplish something else, do that. But that is it for the content. And yeah, we'll see you later. And come to the exam. Don't forget to come for the exam, which is on the 20th at 2 p.m., I think. Is that right? 2 p.m. on the 20th? On what? No. Yeah, the 20th, because it's not the last day of exams is the 22nd. So.
Yeah, 24th. I'm thinking of next semester already.
Too far ahead. Yeah. All right. And end. Discard doodles. There we go. Nice and clean again.